especially working in rural communities, I started listening to stories of others and hearing stories of others, just life. And, I noticed that sexual abuse and sexual assault common, but sometimes in different kind of circumstances, in other countries. I mean, obviously sexual violence happens anywhere and nobody's immune to it. And, you had said that in reading the introduction, just how many people that happens to. And I started hearing stories of other women and, how it happened to them. And, at that time, I wasn't sharing my story, but at those points, I started, I think, coming to the realization that I'm going to have to do something about this someday. Like, I'm going to have to, I don't know if I actively thought I'm going to have to heal, but I knew that there was something more. And as I started hearing more stories and learning about what other people were going through in services or lack of services in other parts, I started to think that it's perhaps going to be my moment to be able to help them.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. Experiencing trauma, especially early in life, can often be suppressed for years until something causes the past to resurface, forcing it to be faced head on in order to heal. At present, sexual assaults are the most prevalent crimes in the U.S., yet also the most unreported. Over 40% of women in the U.S. have encountered sexual violence, and 80% of female assault victims experience their first assault before the age of 25. A staggering set of statistics. Melissa Lombardo knows firsthand the silence surrounding the topic of sexual violence. She experienced a sexual assault during college in the early 2000s, and through fear of retaliation, it went unreported. As she moved into adulthood, she traveled the world, got married, and after a 6-month internship, called Central America her home for 2 decades. It was not until her family moved back to her hometown of Connecticut that she realized her past trauma was holding her back from moving forward, and she needed to do the work to begin to heal. Through the unwavering support of friends and family, she was able to navigate the path of vulnerability and begin the process. She soon heard a whisper telling her she needed to get her voice out there, so she joined a writers group, became a certified sexual assault crisis advocate with the same organization that helped her 20 years ago post-assault, and recently published Hurt, Healing, and Hope, Thriving Beyond Sexual Assault, a book and interwoven performance piece to support the healing of those who have faced their own trauma. Melissa, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your time.
So, Melissa, maybe to get us started, I would love to, and this is, of course, obviously at the level of comfort that you feel in discussing this, just to give us a little bit of context or background of your college days and kind of when this incident occurred.
I was a student in college. I just want to preface this saying that I really had a great experience in college aside from this experience. And so I do not hold any university accountable for anything that has happened to me. I was always very careful. I was always very conscious of my surroundings. And it just so happened that I had met someone who had taken the class that I was taking that particular summer, the semester prior. And in the name of safety, I did everything to keep myself safe, a study group, and made sure that when I started feeling uncomfortable, which I did with that particular person, I made the choice to say, okay, study group is ended. Now it's time for you to go. And unfortunately, that person did not have intentions of going. And that became one of the most traumatic and profound experiences of my life. I was just about 21 years old at the time. And I was very happy and smiling prior to that experience. And I was, always looking forward to trying new things and meeting new people and, having experiences. And after that, there's a marked change in me. my family says it to this day, and especially my mother, and she says, I knew something was going on because I didn't say anything to my mother, or anyone in my family afterwards because of fear, because of shame, because of potential retaliation, because I was threatened. People noticed the behavior changes in me, just the way I carried myself and what I wore and, how I looked to the general public. I wasn't really into taking care of myself at the time because it was something so traumatic that happened. And I felt that bad that I just couldn't take care of myself. And it wasn't until many months later that I did seek out a friend because I knew something was not right. And at the end of the conversation, my friend says, Melissa, what you're sharing with me is that you were raped. And it was hearing that word for the first time at the age of, 21, that was just shocking. How is that possible? I mean, I knew it happened. I knew what it was, but to hear the word for the first time brought me all the way back into those, months before. And it was really through, like you had mentioned, the support of friends and family that I was actually able to get through those college days. That same friend is still a friend to this day. And he would come to my house every weekend. Saturday, he would plop his books down in front of mine at the apartment that I rented, and we would do homework together. And I had another couple, friends of mine, it was a male and female couple at the time. And on Friday nights, they would pick me up, and wherever they went, I went. If they were going to watch a movie, I went to watch a movie. If they were having dinner, I would have dinner. So there's very few people at that time period that knew what was going on in my life. But those people were critical and crucial to that part of the journey where I couldn't say anything out of that same fear. There was another friend at the time where, he would come to the house in the evenings and would just sit with me on the couch. We'd have a cup of tea to make sure I felt safe in the place that I was, renting at the time.
That is such a fortunate thing to have, is people that are supportive and that can be there to help you, especially in a time that it sounds like you weren't necessarily in a place to talk at great length about it anyways, right? I mean, I can imagine
Right.
after it happening, there being a period of time that's really difficult. This is something that I meant to ask in the very beginning, and I think it's an important one. When you were going into college, what were your aspirations? What did you think about? What were you excited about for college before you started?
At the time, I thought I was going to become a teacher. Throughout my high school years, I really wanted to be a teacher in a classroom. It took me until after that I realized I still want to teach, but not in a classroom. I was always very interested in, learning about other people, other cultures. When I was in high school, I was part of the Cultural Diversity Club. And then when I got to college, it was an extension of that, of meeting people from different places. And I think years later, that is also what brought me to travel the world and start a family in Nicaragua. And I think college, for me, was a part of that step into the world, just to be able to have those experiences, where I'm kind of branching out into the world as an 18-year-old going to college for the first time. So I think a lot of anticipation. I was excited. I didn't have a car on campus. I was able to stay on campus and take advantage of, the clubs, the activities. So really, having that college experience where I was getting involved in college life.
It's so important to point out, and I don't think it's lost on anyone, when you think about college years and you think of the age that we're at in college and all of the excitement around, being independent and going off on your own, and to have something like that happen. And this was was it sophomore year?
Yeah, sophomore year. Mm-hmm.
There's a contrast there that I guess is probably not lost on anyone, but that I wanted to point out, of like that hopefulness about college, and to have something like that. That's a bit of a detour from an emotional standpoint. I can imagine that being obviously not only traumatic, but also something that will shift your perspective pretty quickly. But it sounds like as you got out of college, you started exploring travel. So tell us a little bit about that.
As time went on, I'm very good at blocking. I don't do it often now because I know why I do it. Basically, after I was assaulted, I blocked it. It didn't happen. Even when the experience was happening, I was there physically, but my mind wasn't there. Right now, I can picture that nice beach I was on and the sun was warming me. And I mean, I know exactly what this whole place looked like, of where I went to when this was happening to me. I think now that would be disassociation, but at the time I didn't know, I didn't know that. And it was a way to avoid what I call the movie reel that kept going on in my head and still goes on in my head sometimes, because healing isn't linear and it doesn't just go away. But I had at that point, acquired that coping mechanism to be able to move forward. You get to the point where you're so low, you can't go anywhere else except for up. So I think, it was during that time period, having those focuses where I wasn't focusing on those harmful things, I think that really got me through. And it did actually get me to start traveling. In retrospect, most likely I was traveling to do the same, to not have that prime experience here in the forefront. So I had an opportunity to travel, and then I found another opportunity to travel and another and another. And so little by little, I started traveling to places like Spain for study abroad, places like Central America, other parts of the United States. When I graduated from college, I had the opportunity to live and work in New Mexico as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, and I worked with the homeless in Albuquerque. And from there, I was able to get involved in a sister city program, and I went to Mexico for a short period of time. From then I decided, I have this opportunity to create something and go to Spain. So I went to Spain, and then I decided I'm going to get my graduate degree, and I came back stateside and I went to graduate school. And it was graduate school that brought me later to Nicaragua and other parts of Central America, because I realized when I was in graduate school that I didn't want to just travel. I didn't want to just learn another language. I wanted to live and work in another country as if it was my own. That was my goal in life at the time, to be as close to possible, as a native speaker, as close to possible as a native individual from said country. So I looked for different opportunities. And it was actually during that time where I did take an additional step into healing when I was in graduate school. And I took out journal entries from my journals that I had written while I was receiving counseling at the Sexual Assault Crisis Services through the New Britain, Connecticut YWCA. And I called my mother and I said, can you give a particular friend of mine all these journals? I need to start going through them. Something, struck me. I needed to do something. I started planning activities for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I created this draft of what would actually later become the book I published. And we were able to do a draft performance. It was my stories along with stories that, other faculty colleagues, and student colleagues had written. And I was able to do that. I thought, and it's only in retrospect, as I said before, I thought at that time that I healed. Oh, I'm all set. I did this. It's good. And in reality,
right.
I just worked on overdrive, having studying graduate school. Now, 2 weeks after I performed that, I pretty much traveled to Central America. I didn't process anything, and it was great. And I really thought that I was now okay, but then I go to Nicaragua for my internship, and I would still have all these different, situations coming up and thoughts coming up, and moments where I was blocking, or moments, for example, that I write about in my book, that of the first time I actually wore a skirt in public. Because after the sexual assault, I stopped dressing up, as I had mentioned before, and I wasn't wearing skirts and dresses and things like that. But that was in Nicaragua. So that at that time could have said to me, oh, you're not really healed if you're still not able to do these things. I wore that skirt for 5 minutes. I walked down the block. I turned right around and put a pair of pants on. I mean, that was my first experience, many years later.
But it was a baby step, right?
Right. It was definitely a baby step, but it was kind of one of those things I look at now and saying, hey, and I got to Nicaragua only a couple months before that, thinking that I was just fine, but I obviously, wasn't. But at the same time, it was setting the stage for, everything that came next, which I couldn't see that until later. So my 6-month internship in Nicaragua turned into 15 years. The job asked me to stay longer, and I said, sure, why not? Stay longer. Sure, why not? It was a great job. I did graduate from graduate school, and then I found a way to go back to Nicaragua, and, I traveled throughout the country in different community projects and things like that.
So in Nicaragua, which, by the way, yes, I think that when you say that, thinking that everything was kind of okay, isn't it kind of a reset button that we all push with things that we don't want to bring up in life? And I mean, I think of this as any kind of childhood trauma, any kind of trauma, or just experiences that we find unpleasant or difficult. It's like you want so badly for it to be behind you. And those little snippets of time or moments that come up where something shows up and it's like, well, that was weird. Okay, wait. I mean, did you have any conscious moment when you put the skirt on? Like, did you say to yourself, like, I'm totally fine? Or was there any like conscious connection to that at all when you did it?
Oh, yes, there definitely was. And I had a skirt because, I got to Nicaragua and they have beautiful clothing, handmade folkloric clothing.
Yes.
A lot of people, since it's so hot, it's a tropical climate, people wear jean skirts and, and things like that. There's dresses and, I'm looking around and I can't do this. I did think about it. So I went to the market at one point and I bought this, a couple skirts and I had them sitting in the closet, where I was living at the time. And I try. I mean, it took me days just to put the skirt on. So I definitely was conscious
Right.
about something. It never really occurred to me that I hadn't really healed. It was just that I knew I couldn't do this and it was difficult.
So you are in Nicaragua for 15 years. And what were you doing in Nicaragua just like a majority of the time? Were you working in the same area or were you doing the same thing or was it different types of work?
When I went to New Mexico, I realized that I wanted to do more than, I had an international studies degree. It was sociology, Spanish, and politics, and I just wanted a hard science. And then when I went to Spain, I was working at a soup kitchen through the nuns of Mother Teresa. And it was at that time I decided, I said, I need a little bit more, something that people can grasp of, oh, Melissa can do this. So when I went to graduate school, it was for a master's of science in management. And I found an internship in Nicaragua managing a hotel. And I worked for two sisters. One was a graduate at the same university. And at the end of the 6-month internship, they asked me to stay longer. So I decided I would stay longer. And that 6 months turned into 6 more months, another month, another month. And then I did decide to come back stateside to present my thesis, which was in Vermont. And after that, I found a way to come back to Nicaragua and I worked with landmine victims. And then I worked in an organization and working in rural communities, building houses. I worked in a wellness center. And then I came back to that same hotel. And then later on, I found a job running a condo complex. All of these positions, even though they were condos and hotels, they had a social aspect to it. And I was very interested in the time, working with local people and also working in the community. So we brought projects through these businesses into the community, which in here would be considered corporate social responsibility, which wasn't a big term back then, but that's what it was. And we would do social projects through, the hotel or the condo complex, which I really appreciated that, which is why years later, I think that's why I formed my own small business, which is called Right, Heal, Thrive. It's a LLC, but at the same time, it has that social component to it of supporting survivors and their healing allies. It's a social enterprise, just like those other businesses that I worked for, which were very much businesses, but they had such a strong social aspect and worked in the community that's something that I have wanted to bring into other parts of my life as well. So traveling for me and, being able to do things more than just traveling and saying, oh, there's a nice monument or nice sculpture. I wanted to do more, and working, living abroad, volunteering abroad brought that to me to kind of create more depth into what might come next, which I don't think I still even know, because there's just so many, I think, things that have been happening lately that are wonderful based off of sometimes so much pain. So I think it's still a lot that I'm processing.
Well, and it sounds to me like, just in how you described the things that you were gravitating towards, that you have a really generous spirit in terms of like you making a choice of where you want to work is really kind of based on giving back and being of service.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you had met your husband there. Now, was he in the type of work? How did you meet him?
His name is Eduardo, and he is actually the illustrator of the book I later published. I met him when he came to the hotel I was working at. Somebody had told him that one of the owners, Nancy, really appreciates his style of artwork, and he wanted to know if it would be possible to show some of his works and perhaps do an art exhibit. we have differing stories, him and I. I said, give me your card. I'd like to see what you do. And he says that I was too busy to actually want to talk to him more. And I said, no, it's because because Nancy really would like to see the work first before we move forward. But in the end of the day, his artwork really fit in with the hotel, and Nancy loved it. He ended up doing an exhibit, but prior to the exhibit, he had some of his works. He came to the hotel and he was showing me the works, and people would walk by and say, "Oh, I like that one. What does it mean?" He would tell them, and they would say, "Oh, I'd like to buy that." So just sitting at the table, he sold 4 or 5 pieces. He sold out at the exhibit, and I'm thinking, wow, there's something about this guy. We complement each other well. Everything he does is really meaningful, symbolic. He's an indigenous artist. He started as a printmaker, and his big topics are Mother Nature, women, maternity, the female figure, within the universe. And it was just really matched a lot of the things that I think I was kind of searching for. I was on the same path to do as well.
That's wonderful. I'd love to hear that story because it sounds like you said, you complement each other a lot. And has he been on this journey of healing with you? Obviously he's been very supportive, I'm imagining.
Yes.
It also sounds like he's taking part in the book. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because this kind of dives into you coming back to Connecticut at a certain point. And tell us a little bit about that sort of transition back and kind of how that moved you into this next place.
There were moments in Nicaragua where, you had asked me about, if I was conscious or how I felt about, with the skirt, how did that kind of play out? As time went on, especially working in rural communities, I started listening to stories of others and hearing stories of others, just life. And, I noticed that sexual abuse and sexual assault common, but sometimes in different kind of circumstances, in other countries. I mean, obviously sexual violence happens anywhere and nobody's immune to it. And, you had said that in reading the introduction, just how many people that happens to. And I started hearing stories of other women and, how it happened to them. And, at that time, I wasn't sharing my story, but at those points, I started, I think, coming to the realization that I'm going to have to do something about this someday. Like, I'm going to have to, I don't know if I actively thought I'm going to have to heal, but I knew that there was something more. And as I started hearing more stories and learning about what other people were going through in services or, or lack of services in other parts, I started to think that it's perhaps going to be my moment to be able to help them. So with that same, social aspect, listening to stories, I knew it was going to go somewhere. I just never knew where, but every time it impacted me. I think it happens to a lot of people. When something impacts you, you really have to reflect on it. You might need your own alone time. A lot of these stories that were told to me, unfortunately, some of them horrible, were things that made me have to reflect and just kind of be silent with myself, or perhaps in some cases even block more, because there were some difficult stories. It came to a point that coming back to the United States was a good fit for us, just with some of the things that we wanted to do. And I think what really struck me was coming to a place that I knew so well so many years ago as a different individual. And so I was now looking at an old place with new eyes. And I didn't think that this was going to happen, but it obviously did. I came back and I was hit with images and thoughts and memories and things that I didn't remember I had. And I was going to these places that I used to go to or that were familiar with me for me 15, 20 years ago. And now I'm looking at them, remembering, oh my gosh, now here it's in front of me. This has something to do with the assault. I can remember one of those moments where my husband's son and I were going to take a bus trip. We were going to New Hampshire, and it was a community trip. It was with our town. We got on the bus, and I didn't know the bus was stopping in a different location to pick up additional passengers a few towns over. Well, that few towns over happened to be the commuter lot right down the street of where I was assaulted. I had kind of fallen asleep on the bus, and I hear the bus stop. I open my eyes and I'm looking around, and I thought, oh my gosh, I know this spot. And everything right there just flooded back in of, I'm that close, and I don't have to see where that apartment complex was to remember. That alone kind of got me thinking that, something's got to give. I'm not healed. I need to deal with this. Otherwise, it's going to keep coming up, and in addition to other things as well.
Right. No, and that does sound like a pretty profound moment. And it's something that the subtlety of like, you probably internalized that and moved on to what you were doing. But the subtlety of all of that coming back in such a, not flashback, but in a form that sort of is nudging you to, hey, pay attention. This is something that you might need to still look at, which I think happens a lot with us, right? That makes a lot of sense that was something that might have been pivotal. Did you then take stock in that and kind of move forward? Was it something that you started ruminating on then, or how did you kind of get to the next place with that?
I ruminated for a bit. I think I had a mini reaction where I might have had some tears on the bus, but I handled myself quite well. We got to New Hampshire and back. No, but after that, I'm not sure. I started this new journey of going back to the graduate school years. There, I worked on a manuscript, for my journal entries, this draft kind of performance, and I had it. It was in my desk from when I was younger, which is another thing. I knew it was there, and I still couldn't read it at the time. And, it was around that time I decided that, something needs to be done. I ended up finding a writers group. It's called the Birther Book Writers Group. Fabulous people, and it just really fit. Clementina is one of the first contacts I had with that group, and it just felt like that was a good next step. After that, I started to write a bit more. I started to talk a little bit more, exteriorize with people that I didn't know, that were also part of the same group that were writing, stories not similar, but stories that had to do with their own maybe trauma or some of the things that they wanted to help others with going into the future. And it wasn't until that moment that I was able to start reading books by other people who also used their voice and published a book to help people who have went, through experiences such as mine. And those individuals that came before me really impacted me. And I can do this too. I want to be another voice because I don't know who might benefit from hearing something I wrote. These people that wrote these other books, maybe they don't realize that here's this girl, in Connecticut who is forcing herself to read these books because she wants to heal, and she's getting insight from all of them. And in the beginning, when I started picking up some of these books with these difficult titles, I couldn't read them, but there were 4 books I picked up at the local library because I couldn't buy them. At that point, I could not buy them. Just having them in my home in a little stack, I had to have them covered, so I don't know if I actually read in its entirety all of those books. I might have only been able to get through looking at them and flipping through them, and then I might have returned them from the library. I can't recall if I actually read each book in there because I think it was too difficult. But then I would find other titles, so I would try to keep reading some of these books. And it wasn't until, at one point in the Birther Book Writers Group that I actually was able to read one of my own monologues from this book and performance piece that I later published out loud. I was able to read it, and that was really difficult, but it was actually the first time.
That would have been a moment.
Yeah, it was the first time I was able to use the word rape as speaking about myself out loud, not just in my head. I had thought, I wanted to become a sexual assault crisis advocate. I really appreciated the advocate who, we can't find out her name, even though I would have loved to. And there's this advocate at the Sexual Assault Crisis Center. I wanted to possibly help someone like she did. And so I had applied 3 different times to become a sexual assault crisis advocate. And I say 3 times because I couldn't go through with it after the first time or the second time. I couldn't take the classes. Just asking for the application was this big thing. And there's a very nice person that was in charge of the classes at the time. And I said, I have to defer it. I can't do it yet. So I kept trying. And, so between the writers group and the sexual assault crisis advocate training class, I continued to move forward. And it wasn't until I was in that certification class that I realized I have a history of sexual violence. And I actually did in the class, get really overwhelmed, and I needed to take a break for a bit from that. I walked outside the room. Luckily, there was a very nice advocate, and she, listened to me and supported me as I was working through the feelings that were, happening. and I became a sexual assault crisis advocate. I've been certified now for 2 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm still part of the writing group, and my sister actually has been a really big part helping me to also vocalize. Her and I just worked on the audiobook of the book I published, and that just happened 2 months ago, and that was the first time that I have been able to read most of that book out loud and with someone sitting next to me. It was very difficult for both of us,
Right.
but we did it. You know, there were tears. We took our time. It took all day. And it's not a large performance piece. It's a short 3-act, book performance piece. But I was able to do that. And I read a lot of the ones very specific to me, the ones that I want the listener to hear my voice. And there were others I specifically asked her, can you read this one? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I was just going to say, first of all, congratulations on both, on the book and on the performance piece, because the performance piece sounds like, especially having your sister there, which can be difficult, I can understand, but also might be obviously a sense of support in a different way too, to have her close to you as you're doing it, because that could be a scary thing. I just, Melissa, when you talk about this, as you bring these moments up to me, it makes me feel like you have just such a strong sense of spirit that, it's like these nudges. And we've talked about this a little bit of like, what is it? A nudge? Is it a whisper? Is it something that's just like, but to you, it's almost like it came in sort of flashes of light, right? Of like, you'd see something, you'd go back to it, you'd kind of retreat a little, you'd go back, you knew that you needed to face something, but you were also giving yourself the amount of time and grace to get there in your own way. But knowing that, I mean, it feels like you have a really profound sense of self that's kind of like was pushing you to get to a place where you needed to go. So it's wonderful to hear that. I think now that you're a published author, and you are out there working with other individuals within the area of childhood trauma or past trauma, that you're obviously doing really good things. So when did you publish the book? Was this just recently? Was this within last year?
Oh, yes. I just published the book in May. And I think it's interesting when you said about that nudge. One of the things that I think is very important for me is the fact that I didn't understand what that nudge was. And I kept deploring of, what's happening? Why is this happening? And I had a friend, say to me, that's because you're working, what she said, you're working through, God's hands, because I couldn't figure out, why am I doing this? Why it's so difficult. I was getting 16 migraines a month. And I realize now it was all of that in my head, and it was affecting me so much. So for me, the nudge, I kept thinking, why am I doing this? Why do I keep moving forward? This is so difficult. But then somebody or something would happen, and I would remember, I'm doing this for the survivor. I'm doing this for the person supporting the survivor that wants to keep supporting them, but might not know how. The reason that I keep doing this is because today I heard somebody say how thankful they were that a crisis center existed. Or I had somebody else say to me, this happened to my grandson. How can I help my grandson? So there were these moments in time that people would just pass through my life. And I would remember that there's something bigger than me happening that makes me keep going forward. I wasn't sure about publishing because I didn't know what this was going to open me up to. And, but then still there were these nudges, there were these moments that people would come through my life, and they, would remind me of why I'm doing this, and then even to publish, I would say, why am I doing this? And I started to think, well, if I can help one person heal post-trauma, then I would have done my job as a human being, to support that person. And then I started wondering, well, where am I going to find that person? So I want to now reach as many people as possible, because I don't know where or how I might be able to find that person that might just read a short sentence, and maybe that sentence is what helps them get to the next steps, or that helps them 15 years later saying, hey, I read something about somebody who also got through it. I can too. I just want to be able to advocate and educate others who are out there that it is possible. So my husband, he was also really critical and crucial in all of this because he illustrated the book. And if you only read the title and saw the illustrations, you would know everything that I felt. You can see hurt in the illustration. You can see what I was feeling, what survivors feel, going through hope and then, going through healing and then going through hope. It's reflected in all of those illustrations. The book also includes reflection questions. There's a section for performance notes as well. And then there's a journal section for people to also write their own hurt, healing, and hope. My thought was that, after reading or listening to the monologues or performing them, people, would also want to process some of the things that they were thinking about. So just giving them their own safe space within that book or within my own words to, how do they fit into that? Where might they be at on their journey? What are some of the things that might come out of them post reading or post performance that can help them on their next steps? Because I've also realized that there are, survivors, sexual assault survivors is a traumatic experience. Someone that might have been, robbed at gunpoint or their house is burnt down. That's trauma. And we all process things in different ways. And for me, writing has been one of the ways that I've been able to process, and that might help someone else. Mm-hmm. And so it's just being supportive of them.
Yes. And I think that you are obviously the best way to do that is in the kinds of things that you are doing and putting out there, right? Is reaching more people. And we are going to put all of the links to Melissa's book and how to get more information on what she's doing currently, all in the show notes. But Melissa, now, so are you working with people one-on-one at all, or are you mostly just in the promotion of the book, kind of meeting with people as you can and helping them through the advocacy group or the volunteer group?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. I'm not on a crisis line. I knew going into this that would be a lot for me, just because what I write about always, and I want to say always, leads to something more. So somebody that may not have read my book and they know what I do, many times I find that I am working with them on an informal basis because that topic is something that's not talked about a lot, and it's such an important topic. So somebody might hear about me writing on trauma and thriving post-sexual assault, and they know that it's something I went through. So I do have a lot of people that will stop and talk to me at book fairs or literary events and things, and they will talk about their experiences of, somebody they know or somebody they're supporting. I've made various lunch dates post those types of conversations where, I am working with them one-on-one to help them process some of the things that are going on with their perhaps family members in cases I'm thinking about. So I do a lot of that on my own, one-on-one as, survivor to survivor or survivor to support system of how that support person can help a survivor knowing, because I know what I've went through. And I think that's, been really important for me. It's also, I think, really helped me connect with people who have went through an experience. And in those moments, it reminds me of just how prevalent this is. And it reminds me of why I need to keep doing this work. And also, just knowing that I have people coming up to me and asking me if I can help them know what to say or do or how to respond to a survivor in their life that they care about, that they only want the best for, because that, and that's been for me really impactful. I've had a few cases of those types of situations, and it's just another reason of why I need to keep doing what I'm doing, no matter how difficult it might be, because it's not easy. And I really have to remind myself to self-care for myself. And I do have a second publication coming up in October, and it is going to be, or by the time the podcast comes out, it might have already published, but it's a guided journal companion to the Hurt, Healing, Hope, Thriving Beyond Sexual Assault. It's a journal companion for people to learn a little bit more about the importance of journaling and how that can support healing in addition to art. And hopefully by next year, I will be giving workshops with my husband about writing and art and healing. as well, healing and thriving. That's what we're working on. My husband also has illustrated this upcoming journal, just because I don't want to just leave the person at the end of the first book, which is also a journal and performance piece, with nothing to do next. Like, what if that person finds that they really like journaling? Maybe there's another tool that I can create to help them continue their thriving, because for me, it's always a continuation of healing. No matter where I am or what point of life I'm in, there's something that I can always perhaps do next, or another method that might be helpful for me to take me into those next steps, because I want all of us to thrive as much as we're able to. So if this is a helpful way for somebody, and then after that journal, I'll have just a standalone journal, just so people can have a way that then now they have these tools, and they have had these prompts and things like that, I'm saying, oh, you could, do this, or write about this prompt. Now they can kind of go off on their own and write more of whatever there comes from the heart, because journaling in the end is a way for somebody to reflect on their own thoughts and their own healing, and to be able to make sense of things that are going on around them. And I think that is also, for me, part of my support system. It's an inanimate object, but I can bring that to life by writing about it, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. I was going to say, I am such an advocate of journaling, and I have been, it's been part of my life. I used to say that writing saved my life when I got sober. So I completely agree with you. And I think that it not only helps people to be kind of self-reflective, but it also brings up a lot that's going on in the subconscious, right? So a lot of the things that you may not even realizing are going through your head come up and out. And that's also very therapeutic. But I love that you are doing that. I think all of the things that you are putting out there, Melissa, they speak to the person that you are, because, it sounds like from day one, getting out there and starting in your early career, that's what you've done. You've been of service to people. And knowing that you have gone through this traumatic experience is obviously something that you would never wish upon anyone, and is heartbreaking to hear. But if you look at it from the other side of it, this is something that has allowed you to find your voice and to really bring that out to people that you can benefit and help on a really, really deep level. And so I feel like there's always something to be said about the experiences in our life, right, wrong, or indifferent. It's there, it's, part of your history, but it's also something maybe that's pushed you into this different realm that's going to really, really be impactful. Even more so than you already have been, obviously, in all of the other things that you've done. I just thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, because I think you speak to, a situation that's not often easy to talk about. And I just appreciate you being so open and honest with all of us and sharing your story.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here today as well. It's just been really a pleasure being able to speak to you, hear your thoughts as well. And I think it was such a great conversation. And I'm thankful for having been here today.
And let us know how things go, because it sounds like you're going to continue to be creating more and more for people. So we want to stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Melissa, thank you again. That's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.